A millionaire woman let a homeless man and his son live in her garage, but when she entered without knocking, she couldn't believe what he was doing. The Miller mansion stood majestically atop the hill, its white stone walls reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. Emily Miller, a 45-year-old woman with an elegant and distinguished bearing, gazed at the horizon from her bedroom balcony. Her gaze, lost in the distance, reflected a mixture of melancholy and determination. It had been 2 years since her husband, Alexander Miller, had died in a tragic car accident. Since then, Emily had immersed herself in work, firmly directing the business empire her husband had built. However, the lonely nights in that immense house constantly reminded her of the void Alexander had left in her life. The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted her thoughts. It was Martha, the housekeeper, a trusted woman who had been in the service of the Miller family for more than 2 decades. "Mrs. Emily," Martha said breathlessly, "there's a man at the entrance. He says he needs help urgently." Emily frowned, intrigued. "A man? At this hour? What kind of help does he need?" "I don't know, Ma'am," Martha replied. "He seems desperate, and he comes with a small child." The mention of the child stirred something in Emily's heart. She had always wanted to have children, but fate had been cruel in that aspect. Without thinking twice, she headed towards the main entrance. Upon opening the door, she came face to face with a man in his 40s, disheveled in appearance, but with intense blue eyes that conveyed a mixture of anguish and determination. At his side, clinging to his leg, was a boy no older than 6 with the same eye color as his father. "Good evening, ma'am," the man said in a husky voice. "My name is Michael, and this is my son Noah. We've been evicted from our apartment and have nowhere to go. I saw that you have a large garage, and I was wondering if you could allow us to spend the night there. Just this night, I promise." Emily observed them in silence for a few seconds. There was something in Michael's gaze that seemed strangely familiar to her, though she couldn't place from where the boy, for his part, looked at her with a mixture of fear and hope. Against all odds, and to her own surprise, Emily nodded. "You can stay in the garage tonight," she said. "Martha will bring you blankets and something to eat." The relief on Michael's face was immediate. "Thank you, Mom. You don't know how much we appreciate it." As Martha led them to the garage, Emily couldn't help but feel a strange uneasiness. What had led her to make that decision? Was it compassion, or was there something more, something she couldn't identify? That night, Emily tossed and turned in her bed, unable to fall asleep. The image of Michael and Noah kept appearing in her mind. There was something about them that awakened in her, a protective instinct she thought forgotten. The next morning, Emily woke up early and headed to the garage. To her surprise, she found Michael meticulously cleaning the place. "Good morning, ma'am," he said upon seeing her. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to leave everything spotless before we left." Emily observed him for a moment before making a decision that would change the course of their lives. "There's no need for you to leave," she said. "You can stay here as long as you need to get back on your feet." The gratitude in Michael's eyes was evident. "I don't know how to thank you, ma'am." "Emily," she said. "My name is Emily." From that day on, an unusual routine was established in the Miller mansion. Michael took care of the property maintenance, while Noah spent much of the day playing in the extensive gardens. Emily, for her part, surprised herself by spending more and more time at home, observing from afar the interaction between father and son. As the weeks passed, Emily noticed how her heart softened. Noah's laughter filled the mansion's hallways with life, and conversations with Michael during dinners became increasingly longer and deeper. One afternoon, while Emily was working in her office, she heard a scream coming from the garden. Upon running out, she found Noah crying, with a scraped knee after falling off his bicycle. Without thinking, Emily took him in her arms and brought him inside the house to treat him. As she gently cleaned the wound, Emily felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Noah looked at her with trust, and for a moment, Emily allowed herself to imagine what it would have been like to have a child of her own. Michael appeared at the door, panting after running from the other end of the garden. "Is he okay?" he asked worriedly. Emily nodded, smiling. "Just a scratch. Nothing a little love can't cure." The look they exchanged at that moment was charged with an intensity that neither of them expected. For the first time, Emily saw Michael not just as the man she had helped, but as an attractive and caring man. However, that same night, as Emily prepared for bed, a memory assaulted her forcefully. It was the image of Alexander's accident, a memory she had tried to bury deep in her mind. And suddenly, like lightning, she remembered where she had seen those blue eyes that captivated her so much before. With her heart racing, Emily realized that Michael had been at the accident scene, not as a simple witness, but as part of it. How had she not remembered before? And why hadn't Michael said anything? Confusion and pain took over her. How could she be developing feelings for the man who had possibly been involved in her husband's death? Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a man observed photographs of the Miller mansion with a malicious smile. It was Frank Saunders, a former associate of Alexander, who had been expelled from the company for financial irregularities. "Well, well, Emily," he muttered to himself. "It seems you've welcomed some very interesting guests. I wonder what your high society friends would say if they knew you're harboring a homeless man and his son." Frank had been waiting for the perfect moment to take revenge on the Millers, and now it seemed that the opportunity had fallen into his lap. With this information, he could blackmail Emily and recover what, according to him, rightfully belonged to him. What Frank didn't know was that Michael was guarding an even bigger secret in the small suitcase he had brought with him. Hidden among old clothes and some of Noah's toys was a document that could change everyone's fate. As the night progressed, 3 restless souls in the Miller mansion struggled with their own demons. Emily, divided between her emerging feelings and the suspicion about Michael's role in Alexander's death. Michael, tormented by a past he dared not reveal, and the fear of losing the security he had found for his son. And in his innocence, Noah, oblivious to the approaching storms, dreamed of a future in which Emily would be more than just the kind lady who had given them a home. The next morning, breakfast at the Miller mansion was charged with palpable tension. Emily, with dark circles that betrayed a sleepless night, avoided Michael's gaze. He, perceiving the change in his benefactor's attitude, debated between asking what was happening or maintaining the low profile that had allowed him to survive until now. Noah, oblivious to the tension between the adults, chatted animatedly about his plans to explore the attic of the mansion, a place that Emily had kept closed since Alexander's death. "Can we go to the attic, Emily?" the boy asked innocently. "Dad says there must be hidden treasures there." The mention of the attic made Emily visibly tense. "I don't think that's a good idea, Noah. That place is full of dust and old objects." Michael, noticing Emily's discomfort, intervened. "Noah, why don't we go play in the garden after breakfast? We could build that treehouse you want so much." The boy's face lit up at the idea, momentarily forgetting his curiosity about the attic. Emily silently thanked Michael for his intervention, although she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for her coldness. As Michael and Noah went out to the garden, Emily took refuge in her office, immersed in her thoughts. How could she reconcile the feelings she was developing for Michael with the suspicion of his involvement in Alexander's accident? And why hadn't he mentioned anything about it? Her musings were interrupted by the sound of the phone. Upon answering, the voice on the other end of the line made her blood run cold. "Good morning, dear Emily," said Frank Saunders' honeyed voice. "I hope I'm not interrupting your idyllic family life." Emily tensed. "What do you want, Frank?" "Oh, nothing complicated," he replied with false innocence. "I was just wondering how your high society friends would react if they knew you're harboring a homeless man and his son in your garage. Imagine the headlines: The Miller widow and her new street family." Emily's heart was pounding. "You wouldn't dare." Frank's laughter resonated through the phone. "We both know I would, dear, but we can reach an agreement. How about you return the company shares you took from me? In exchange, your little secret will be safe." Emily gripped the phone tightly. "I need time to think about it." "Take your time, dear," Frank said sarcastically. "You have 48 hours before this touching story reaches every newspaper in the city." The call was cut off, leaving Emily shaking with rage and helplessness. Not only did she have to deal with her confused feelings towards Michael and the suspicion about his past, but now she also faced blackmail that threatened to destroy everything she had built. Meanwhile, in the garden, Michael watched Noah play with a mixture of love and concern. He knew he couldn't keep his secret hidden for much longer. The closeness with Emily and life in the mansion had awakened feelings in him that he thought were buried, but had also brought to the surface the ghosts of his past. He took out a small gold medallion from his pocket, the only memento he kept from his previous life. Inside, an inscription almost erased by time. "To my son, Michael, heir to the Andrews." Michael closed his eyes, remembering the day he had lost everything. The accident, the confusion, the temporary memory loss that had led him to wander the streets with his young son. And then, the slow process of recovering fragments of his past, only to discover that it was better to keep them hidden. What Michael didn't know was that this medallion was the key to unraveling a mystery that involved not only his own family, but also the Millers and Frank Saunders. That night, while everyone slept, Noah, driven by his childish curiosity, decided to explore the attic on his own. With silent steps, he climbed the stairs and, using the key he had seen hidden in Emily's study, opened the attic door. The place was full of objects covered by white sheets, like silent ghosts guarding the secrets of the past. Noah advanced cautiously, his eyes wide with excitement at each new discovery. In a corner, an old wooden chest caught his attention. Upon opening it, he found old photographs, yellowed documents, and to his surprise, a medallion identical to the one his father kept so carefully. Confused and excited by his find, Noah took the medallion and some photographs, determined to show them to his father in the morning. What the little boy didn't know was that these pieces of the past were about to trigger a series of events that would forever change the fate of all the inhabitants of the Miller mansion. As Noah stealthily returned to his room, Emily tossed and turned restlessly in her bed, tormented by nightmares in which Alexander's face merged with Michael's. In her dream, Alexander looked at her reproachfully. "How can you love the man who took my life?" Miles away, Frank Saunders smiled contentedly as he planned his next move. Little did he know that fate was weaving a much more complex web than he could imagine. Dawn arrived at the Miller mansion, bringing with it a palpable tension that floated in the air like a dense fog. Emily, who had barely managed to fall asleep, got up early and headed to her study. She needed to think, to plan her next move in the face of Frank's threat. Meanwhile, Noah, excited by his nocturnal discovery, ran to his father's room with the medallion and photographs in his small hands. Dad, look what I found!" exclaimed the boy, jumping on Michael's bed. Michael, still drowsy, slowly sat up. "What's going on, champ? What's that you've got there?" Noah extended his hands, showing the medallion. "It's just like yours, Dad. I found it in the attic last night." Michael's face paled as he saw the object. With trembling hands, he took the medallion and examined it closely. It was identical to his, with the same inscription, "To my son Alexander, heir to the Millers." "Noah," Michael said gravely, "where exactly did you find this?" The boy, perceiving his father's sudden seriousness, responded in a quiet voice, "In the attic there was a big chest and—" "You entered the attic without permission?" Michael interrupted, his tone a mixture of concern and reprimand. Noah lowered his gaze, ashamed. "I'm sorry, Dad, it's just that I wanted to see what was there." Michael sighed deeply, his mind working at full speed. The medallion in his hands was proof of a truth he had tried to hide, a truth that now threatened to come to light. "Noah, listen to me," said Michael, looking his son in the eyes. "We can't tell anyone about this, understand? Especially Emily. Promise me you'll keep the secret." The boy nodded, though not fully, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I promise, Dad." Michael hugged his son, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and memories. The medallion Noah had found belonged to Alexander Miller, Emily's late husband, and the one he carefully guarded, identical but with his own name, was proof of a past he had tried to leave behind. At that moment, a knock on the door startled them. It was Martha, the housekeeper. "Mr. Michael, Mrs. Emily, requests your presence in the study," she announced in a formal tone. Michael swallowed hard, aware that this could be the moment when everything would crumble. "Thank you, Martha. I'll be there in a moment." As he hurriedly dressed, Michael hid both medallions in his pants pocket. Then he knelt in front of Noah. "Remember, champ, not a word about what you found. I promise I'll explain everything later, okay?" Noah nodded solemnly, and Michael left the room with his heart pounding heavily in his chest. In the study, Emily paced back and forth, her mind divided between Frank's threat and her suspicions about Michael. When he entered, she stopped, observing him with a mixture of conflicting emotions. "Michael," Emily began, her voice tense, "there's something I need to ask you, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Michael nodded, preparing for the worst. "Of course, Emily. What is it about?" Emily took a deep breath before continuing. "The day of my husband Alexander's accident, you were there, weren't you?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Michael felt as if the ground was moving beneath his feet. This was the moment he had feared since arriving at the Miller mansion. "Emily, Michael began, but was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Martha appeared at the study door, her face showing concern. "Mrs. Emily, Mr. Frank Saunders is here. He says it's urgent." Emily paled. Frank's arrival couldn't have come at a worse time. She looked at Michael, the unanswered question still floating between them. "Show him in, Martha," Emily finally said, her voice barely a whisper as they waited for Frank's arrival. The atmosphere in the study became even tenser. Michael, aware that he was on the verge of losing everything he had built in recent months, made a decision. "Emily," he said softly, "there's something I must tell you. Something that will change everything you think you know about me, about Alexander, and about the accident." But before he could continue, Frank Saunders entered the room, a triumphant smile on his face. "Well, well," said Frank, his eyes moving from Emily to Michael. "It seems I've interrupted an interesting conversation. I hope you don't mind if I join in." Emily straightened up, facing Frank with a defiant look. "What are you doing here, Frank? I thought I gave you 48 hours. Frank laughed softly. "Oh dear, Emily, circumstances have changed. You see, I've discovered something much more interesting than a simple vagrant living in your garage." Michael stepped forward, placing himself protectively next to Emily. "Whatever you think you know, Mr. Saunders, I assure you you're mistaken." Frank raised an eyebrow, amused. "Am I? Then I suppose this will mean nothing to you." With a theatrical movement, Frank pulled a third medallion from his pocket, identical to the ones Michael kept in his pocket. Emily's face went from confusion to shock. "That medallion, it's the same as Alexander's." "Exactly," said Frank, his smile widening. "And I wonder, what would the press say if they knew that the vagrant you took in is none other than the lost brother of your late husband?" The silence that followed was deafening. Emily looked at Michael, searching his eyes for some. Claude's response was limited as it hit the maximum length allowed at this time. GL, continue. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily looked at Michael, searching his eyes for some sign that it was all an elaborate lie concocted by Frank. But what she saw was guilt, fear, and above all a deep sadness. "Michael," Emily whispered, her voice breaking, "is it true?" Michael closed his eyes, defeated. Slowly, he took the two medallions from his pocket and placed them on the desk next to Frank's. "Yes," he finally said, "it's true. My real name is Michael Miller. I am Alexander's younger brother." Emily staggered, leaning on the desk to keep from falling. Her entire reality was crumbling before her eyes. "But how? Why?" she managed to ask, her mind struggling to process this new information. Michael took a deep breath. "It's a long story, Emily. A story that begins long before the accident, and that involves more people than you can imagine." Frank, seeing that the situation was slipping out of his hands, tried to regain control. Well, it seems we have a lot to talk about. How about we discuss the terms of my silence?" But Emily, regaining her composure, turned to him with a look that could have frozen hell. "You," she said, her voice laden with barely contained anger, "have nothing to negotiate here. Get out of my house right now, or I swear the next thing you'll be negotiating will be with my lawyers. Frank, surprised by Emily's sudden ferocity, took a step back. This isn't over, he threatened, before turning on his heels and quickly leaving the study. Once alone, Emily turned to Michael, her eyes full of unshed tears. I want the truth, she said, the whole truth now. Michael nodded, slowly. You're right. It's time you knew everything. But Emily, you should know that this truth will change everything you thought you knew about your life with Alexander. At that moment, a sharp scream broke the tension in the air. It was Noah's voice coming from the garden. Dad! Emily! Come! Quick! Without thinking twice, both Michael and Emily ran towards the garden, momentarily united by their concern for the boy. What they found there would add a new layer of mystery to the already complicated situation. Noah was standing next to an old oak tree, excitedly pointing to a hole in the trunk. Look what I found, he exclaimed. Michael approached cautiously, followed closely by Emily. Inside the tree hollow, partially hidden by years of leaves and dirt, was a rusty metal box. With trembling hands, Michael pulled out the box and opened it. Inside was a bundle of letters yellowed by time, old photographs, and a worn leather diary. Emily gasped as she recognized the handwriting on one of the letters. That's Alexander's handwriting. Michael nodded gravely. And this, he said, pointing to another letter, is mine. The three looked at each other, aware that they were on the verge of discovering a truth that had remained hidden for years, a truth that had the power to rewrite the past and redefine their future. I think, Michael finally said, it's time we all knew the true story of the Miller brothers. As the sun began to set on the horizon, bathing the garden in a golden light, Emily, Michael, and Noah headed back to the house. The box Noah had discovered promised to reveal long-buried secrets, secrets that would forever change their lives. What none of them knew was that, hidden among the bushes, Frank Saunders had witnessed the entire discovery. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of greed and determination. This new turn of events would only fuel his plans for revenge and ambition. As the improvised family entered the mansion, carrying the box from the past with them, Frank slipped away into the growing darkness, his mind working on a new plan. The game had barely begun, and he was determined to be the ultimate winner. Inside the house, Emily led Michael and Noah to the main living room. Carefully, she placed the box on the center table and sat down, her face a mask of contained emotions. All right, Michael, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's time you told me the whole truth from the beginning. Michael nodded, taking a seat across from her. Noah, sensing the gravity of the moment, curled up next to his father, his large eyes moving from one to the other. The story begins more than 30 years ago, Michael began, his voice laden with emotion. Alexander and I were the heirs of one of the most influential families in the city. Our parents, Robert and Grace Miller, had built a business empire from scratch. Alexander, being the oldest, was destined to take the reins of the family business. I, for my part, was always the rebel, the dreamer. Emily listened attentively, her eyes fixed on Michael as he unraveled a story that seemed straight out of a novel. Everything changed the day we met Frank Saunders, Michael continued. We were young, ambitious, and Frank seemed to have all the answers. He convinced us that we could triple the family fortune with some risky investments. Alexander was cautious, but I got carried away by the excitement. Michael paused, his eyes lost in painful memories. I convinced Alexander to trust Frank. We used company funds to invest in a scheme that turned out to be fraudulent. When it all came crashing down, we were on the brink of ruin. Emily gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. But the company recovered. Alexander saved it. Michael nodded sadly. Yes, he did, but at a terrible cost. Our parents, devastated by what we had done, died in an accident shortly after Alexander took full control of the company, working day and night to save it. And I couldn't bear the guilt. What did you do? Emily asked quietly. I left, Michael replied, shame evident in his voice. I left a note saying I couldn't face the consequences of my actions and disappeared. I spent years wandering, trying to forget who I was, where I came from. until I met Noah's mother. The boy, who had been listening silently, looked up at the mention of his mother. "She gave me a reason to live again," Michael continued, stroking his son's hair, "but fate had other plans. She died shortly after Noah was born, and I found myself alone, with a baby, not knowing how to be a father." Emily, moved despite her confusion and pain, extended a trembling hand towards Michael. "And the accident? How did you become involved in Alexander's death?" Michael closed his eyes, as if the memory was too painful to face. "That day, that terrible day, I had decided to come back after years of wandering, of trying to find myself. I felt it was time to face my past. Noah was barely 4 years old, and I wanted him to know his roots, his true family." He paused, taking a breath before continuing. "I arrived in the city that morning. I didn't know how to contact Alexander after so many years, so I decided to wait near the company offices. I saw him come out, get into his car. I followed him." Emily held her breath, her heart pounding in anticipation of what was to come. "At a traffic light, I mustered up the courage and approached his window. You should have seen his face, Emily. The surprise, the disbelief, and then the anger. He yelled at me to go away, that it was too late to repair the damage I had done. But I insisted. I begged him to listen to me." Michael stopped, his voice breaking. Noah, feeling his father's anguish, cuddled closer to him. The traffic light turned green. Alexander drove off, furious. I, desperate, clung to the car door, begging him to give me a chance. It was then that when he lost control of the vehicle, Emily stifled a cry, tears running freely down her cheeks. "It all happened so fast," Michael continued, his voice barely a whisper. "The car spun sharply, crashed into a barrier. I was thrown off, hitting my head on the pavement. The last thing I remember is seeing Alexander's car flip over, and then darkness." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily slowly stood up, walking towards the window. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, pain, anger, confusion. "Why didn't you say anything when you came here?" she finally asked, without. Turning around, Michael lowered his gaze. "When I woke up in the hospital, I didn't remember anything. The concussion had caused me temporary amnesia. I only knew my name, and that I had a son to take care of. I spent months recovering, living on the streets, trying to remember who I was. When the memories finally started to come back, I felt overwhelmed by guilt. I couldn't face what I had done." He stood up, cautiously approaching Emily. "When we came to your door that night, I had no idea who you were. It was only later, seeing Alexander's photos in the house, that I began to remember. But by then, you had already taken us in. We were already part of your life. I was afraid." Emily, afraid of losing the only good thing that had happened to Noah and me in years. Emily turned slowly, her eyes meeting Michael's. In them she saw regret, pain, but also something else. Something that had been developing between them over the past few months. "You should have told me," she said softly. "I know," Michael replied, "and I'm sorry more than you can imagine." At that moment, Noah, who had been observing silently, approached Emily. He took her hand with his small fingers and looked at her with eyes full of innocence and hope. "Does this mean we can't live here anymore?" he asked in a trembling voice. Emily looked at the boy, then at Michael, and finally at the box, with the letters and photographs on the table. Her world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. But amidst the chaos, one thing was clear. These two beings had become an important part of her life. "I don't know, Noah," she answered honestly. "There's a lot to process, a lot to understand. But what I do know is that whatever happens, you're not alone." Michael took a step towards her, his face a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "Emily, But before he could continue, the sound of the doorbell startled them all. Martha appeared at the entrance of the living room, her face pale. "Mrs. Emily, it's the police. They say they need to speak with you and Mr. Michael urgently." The three adults exchanged worried looks. What new twist did fate have in store for them? Emily straightened her shoulders, preparing to face whatever came. "Show them in, Martha." As they waited for the officers to arrive, Michael took Emily's hand, surprising her. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "I want you to know that these months with you and Noah have been the happiest of my life, and that, if I could go back, I would do things differently for you, for us." Emily felt a lump in her throat. Despite everything she had just discovered, she couldn't deny the feelings she had developed for Michael. But before she could respond, 2 police officers entered the living room. "Mrs. Emily Miller," one of them asked, "we're sorry to interrupt, but we have crucial information about your husband's accident." Emily and Michael exchanged an alarmed look. What else could come to light? "We've reopened the case," the officer continued. "New evidence suggests that the accident may not have been an accident." The shock was evident on the faces of all present. Noah, feeling the tension, clung to his father's leg. "What do you mean?" Emily managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. The officer pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Mrs. Miller, Mr." He looked at Michael questioningly. "Michael and Miller," Michael responded, correcting himself at the last moment. "Mr. Miller," the officer continued, "we have reason to believe that the accident that ended Alexander Miller's life was, in fact, a premeditated murder." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily staggered, leaning on the back of an armchair to keep from falling. Michael, for his part, visibly paled. "But how? Who?" Emily managed to articulate. The second officer, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "That's what we're investigating, Mrs. Miller. But we have a main suspect, Frank Saunders." Upon hearing that name, both Emily and Michael exchanged looks of astonishment and horror. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together in a terrifying way. "We'll need your cooperation for this investigation," the first officer continued. "And Mr. Miller, we'll have to ask you some questions about your presence at the accident scene." Michael nodded slowly, aware that the moment to fully face his past had come. "Of course, officer, I'm willing to cooperate in any way necessary." Emily, regaining some of her composure, addressed the officers. "May I ask what new evidence led you to reopen the case after so long?" The officers exchanged a look before responding. "An anonymous source provided us with information and evidence suggesting tampering with Mr. Miller's vehicle brakes. Additionally, we've discovered suspicious bank transfers made by Mr. Saunders in the days before and after the accident." As the officers continued explaining the details of the investigation, Emily felt as if the ground was moving beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about Alexander's death, about her life since then, was being questioned. She looked at Michael, who was listening attentively to the officers, his face a mixture of shock and determination. Then at Noah, who was observing the scene with big, frightened eyes, not fully understanding what was happening. At that moment, Emily made a decision. No matter what the past might reveal, no matter what secrets and lies came to light, she would protect this small family that fate had put in her path, and together they would face whatever came. "Officers," she said firmly, surprising everyone present, "we're at your disposal for whatever you need. But before we continue, there's something you should know." Michael looked at her, alarmed, but Emily gave him a reassuring look. "Mr. Miller," she continued, "is actually Michael Miller, the younger brother of my late husband." The officers exchanged surprised looks, while Michael held his breath, waiting for the consequences of this revelation. "I know this complicates things," Emily added, "but I believe it's crucial for your investigation, and I want it to be clear that, whatever happens, Michael and his son have my full support and protection." Michael looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. Despite everything that had come to light, despite the lies and secrets, Emily was willing to defend what they had built together. The officers, recovering from the surprise, nodded gravely. "This information certainly adds a new dimension to the case," one of them said. "Mr. Miller, we'll need to take your detailed statement about the events of that day and your relationship with your brother and Mr. Saunders." Michael nodded. "I'm ready to tell the whole truth," he said, his voice laden with determination. As the officers prepared to take the statements, Emily approached Noah, who had been observing everything in silence. "Noah, honey," she said softly, kneeling in front of him. "I know all this is very confusing and scary, but I want you to know that, whatever happens, You and your dad will always have a home here with me. We're a family now, do you understand? The boy's eyes filled with tears of relief and joy. Without saying a word, he threw himself into Emily's arms, hugging her tightly. Michael, observing the scene, felt a mixture of overwhelming emotions. Gratitude towards Emily for her loyalty and compassion, love for his son and for the woman who had taken them in, and determination to face his past and do things right this time. As night fell on the Miller mansion, a new story began to be written. A story of revealed secrets, of love found in the most unlikely circumstances, and of a family forged in the fire of adversity. What none of them knew was that, hidden in the shadows outside the mansion, Frank Saunders observed the scene with a mixture of rage and desperation. His plans were crumbling, but he wasn't willing to give up without a fight. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself, disappearing into the darkness of the night. "The real battle is just beginning." Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Emily, Michael, and Noah prepared to face together whatever fate had in store for them, united by bonds stronger than blood or the past. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they had hope. And so, with the sound of police sirens fading in the distance and the promise of a new day on the horizon, the first chapter of their story came to an end, leaving all involved on the edge of a precipice, ready to jump into the unknown dawn arrived at the Miller mansion, its first rays illuminating a house transformed by the events of the previous night. Emily, Michael, and Noah, exhausted after hours of police interrogations, slept deeply, each dealing in their dreams with the revelations and emotions of the day before. It was Martha who woke them, her face a mask of concern. "Mrs. Emily, Mr. Michael, you have to see this," she said, turning on the television in the main living room. On the screen, a news presenter spoke in a grave tone. "In a surprising turn of events, the police have reopened the case of businessman Alexander Miller's death, which occurred 2 years ago. Sources close to the investigation suggest it could be a premeditated homicide. Additionally, it is rumored that Michael Miller, Alexander's younger brother, presumed missing for years. Claude's response was limited as it hit the maximum length allowed at this time, GL continua. Additionally, it is rumored that Michael Miller, Alexander's younger brother presumed missing for years, has returned and is cooperating with the authorities." Emily and Michael exchanged worried looks. Their story, their secrets were now exposed to public scrutiny. "How is this possible?" Emily murmured. "The investigation was supposed to be discreet." Michael, his face grim, responded, "Frank. It must have been him who leaked the information to the press." At that moment, the mansion's phone began to ring incessantly. Journalists, former business associates, curious friends, everyone wanted to know the truth behind the headlines. Emily, regaining her composure, took control of the situation. "Martha, don't answer any calls, Michael. We need a plan. We can't hide forever." As they discussed their options, Noah entered the living room, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "What's going on? Why are there so many people outside?" Michael approached his son, hugging him protectively. "Don't worry, champ. They're just curious people, but we won't let them bother us." Emily, observing the scene, felt a wave of determination. This small family that fate had put in her path had become the most important thing in her life, and she was willing to fight for them. "I have an idea," she finally said. "We're going to face this head-on. We'll give a press conference, tell our version of the story before Frank or anyone else can distort it." Michael looked at her, surprised by her audacity. "Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no turning back." Emily nodded, her face reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. "It's the only way to protect ourselves, to protect what we've built." As they prepared to face the press, the doorbell rang. Martha, cautious, went to answer. Moments later, she returned with a confused expression. "Mrs. Emily, there's a woman who insists on seeing you. She says she has crucial information about Mr. Alexander's case." Emily and Michael exchanged surprised looks. "Did she give a name?" Emily asked Martha. Nodded. "She said her name is Grace Miller." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael visibly paled, while Emily clung to the back of a chair to maintain her balance. "Impossible," Michael whispered. She died. Our parents died years ago." Emily, recovering from the shock, made a decision. "Show her in, Martha. Whoever she is, we need to know what's going on." Moments later, an elegant woman in her 60s entered the living room. Her face, marked by the years but still beautiful, showed a mixture of emotions: joy, pain, regret. "Michael," she said in a trembling voice, her eyes fixed on the man who had been her youngest son. "My boy." Michael took a step back, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "No, it's not possible. You died. The accident." Grace Miller shook her head, tears running down her cheeks. "No, son, we didn't die, but we let the world believe it, let you believe it." Emily, observing the scene with a mixture of amazement and caution, intervened. "Mrs. Miller, I think we all deserve an explanation." Grace nodded, taking a seat in one of the armchairs. Her gaze fell on Noah, who was observing the scene with curiosity from his father's arms. A sad smile drew on her face. "It's a long story," she began. "A story of love, betrayal, and sacrifice. It all started more than 30 years ago when Robert, my husband, discovered something terrible about his business partners. As Grace unraveled a story of corporate conspiracies, threats, and an elaborate plan to protect their children, Emily and Michael listened attentively, their minds struggling to process this new information that threatened to change everything they thought they knew about their past. "When we discovered the fraud in the company," Grace continued, "we knew our lives were in danger. These men would stop at nothing to keep their secret. So we made the most difficult decision of our lives, to fake our death to protect you." Michael, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke, his voice laden with emotion. "And you let us believe you had died. Do you have any idea what that did to Alexander and me?" Grace lowered her gaze, the weight of her past decisions evident on her face. "I know, son. And there isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret the pain we caused you. But at that moment, we believed it was the only way to keep you safe." Emily, processing all this new information, intervened. "But why reveal all this now? What has changed?" Grace pulled an envelope from her purse. "Because the danger has returned, and this time, it's worse than ever." She opened the envelope and extracted a series of documents. These papers prove that Frank Saunders was not only involved in the original fraud, but was also responsible for the accident that killed Alexander. The shock was evident on Emily and Michael's faces. Noah, feeling the tension in the room, cuddled closer to his father. "But that's not all," Grace continued. "Frank has discovered that Robert and I are alive, and now he's after the fortune we hid before our death. A fortune that legally belongs to you, Michael, and to Alexander's son." Emily gasped, looking at Michael in amazement. "Alexander's son? But Alexander and I never—" Grace gently interrupted her. "No, dear, Alexander had a son before he met you. A son he gave up for adoption to protect him from the dangers surrounding the family." Michael, who had been processing all this information in silence, suddenly paled even more. "Noah," he whispered, looking at his son with new eyes. "Noah is Noah Alexander's son?" Grace nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, Michael. When you disappeared, Alexander searched for you tirelessly. That's how he discovered Noah's existence. But by then you had already formed a bond with him, so he decided not to interfere." Emily abruptly stood up, walking towards the window. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The boy she had come to love as her own was, in reality, her late husband's son. And Michael, the man for whom she had developed deep feelings, was actually his uncle. "This is too much," Emily managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. Michael, still hugging Noah, approached. "Emily, I know this changes everything, but my feelings for you, for us, haven't changed." Emily turned to him, tears in her eyes. "How can you say that? How can we move forward after all this?" Before Michael could respond, the sound of breaking glass filled the room. A rock wrapped in paper had been thrown through the window. Grace jumped to her feet. "They found us. We have to go now." Michael picked up the paper, quickly reading the message. His face turned grim. "It's from Frank. He says he has Dad, and if we want to see him alive, we must hand over the documents and the fortune." Emily, momentarily overcoming her shock, took control of the situation. "Martha," she called to the housekeeper, "prepare the car, we're leaving." As they hurried to leave the mansion, Emily paused for a moment, looking at Michael and Noah. Despite all the revelations, despite the complications and dangers, she knew one thing for certain: she would do anything to protect this family that fate had put in her path. "Let's go," she said, taking Michael's hand. "We'll face this together." As the car drove away from the Miller mansion, none of them knew what the future held for them, but amidst the uncertainty and danger, they had found something precious: the love and unity of a family forged in adversity. What they didn't know was that Frank Saunders was watching them leave, an evil smile on his face. "Let the game begin," he muttered, pulling out his phone to make a call. "Phase 1 completed now. Let's move on to Phase 2. As the car faded into the distance, the sun was setting on the horizon, plunging the city into shadows. The night promised to be long, full of dangers and revelations. And somewhere, among the shadows, Robert Miller waited, his fate intertwined with that of his family in a way none of them could imagine. The real test was just beginning, and only time would tell if love and loyalty would be enough to overcome the secrets and betrayals of the past night had fallen over the city. A cloak of darkness that seemed to reflect the uncertainty enveloping the occupants of the car speeding away from the Miller mansion. Emily, at the wheel, kept her eyes fixed on the road, her knuckles white from the force with which she gripped the steering wheel. Beside her, Michael tried to calm a frightened Noah, while Grace Miller, in the back seat, frantically reviewed the documents she carried with her. "Where are we going?" Michael asked, breaking the tense silence that reigned in the vehicle. Emily took a few seconds to respond, as if carefully weighing her options. "I have a cabin on the outskirts of the city," she finally said. "Alexander and I used to go there when we needed to escape from the world. No one else knows of its existence." Grace nodded in approval. "Good idea. We need a safe place to regroup and plan our next move." As the car entered the winding roads leading to the mountains, Noah finally dared to speak. "Dad," he said quietly, "is what the lady said true? Am I adopted?" Michael felt as if an icy fist was squeezing his heart. He looked at his son, those innocent eyes now observing him with a mixture of fear and confusion, and knew he couldn't lie to him. No more secrets, no more deceptions. "Noah," he began, his voice breaking slightly, "your mother and I love you more than anything in this world. That will never change no matter what happens. But yes, it's true that I'm not your biological father. However, that doesn't mean you're not my son in all the ways that matter." Emily, listening to the conversation, felt tears threatening to blur her vision. Despite all the revelations, despite the confusion and pain, she couldn't deny the love she felt for this little boy, who somehow was Alexander's last legacy. Noah remained silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, to everyone's surprise, a small smile appeared on his face. "So, does that mean I have two dads? One in heaven, and one here with me?" Michael felt a lump forming in his throat. "Yes, champ, that's exactly what it means." The moment of tenderness was abruptly interrupted by the sound of an engine approaching. At high speed, Emily looked in the rearview mirror and felt panic taking over her. "We're being followed," she said, accelerating even more. Grace turned to look out the rear window. "It's Frank. He must have anticipated our movements." Michael cursed under his breath. How could he find us so quickly? The answer came in the form of a beep from Grace's purse. The woman, with trembling hands, pulled out a small device. "A tracker," she murmured. "He must have put it in the documents." Without thinking twice, Emily sharply turned the wheel, taking a secondary road that led into the forest branches, hit the sides of the car as the vehicle pursuing them struggled to keep up on the rough terrain. "I know these woods," Emily said with determination. "There's an old abandoned mine not far from here. We can lose them there." Minutes that seemed like hours passed as Emily skillfully maneuvered through increasingly narrow and dangerous paths. Finally, the entrance to the mine appeared before them, a dark mouth that promised both refuge and danger. Emily stopped the car, and everyone hurriedly got out. "Quick, inside," she urged, taking Noah's hand while Michael helped Grace. They had barely entered the darkness of the mine when they heard the sound of another vehicle stopping outside. Frank Saunders' voice resonated in the night. "I know you're in there," he shouted. "You have no escape. Hand over the documents and Grace, and maybe I'll consider letting you live." Michael, his face barely visible in the gloom, looked at Emily. "Go with Noah and my mother. I'll distract them." "No," Emily said firmly. "I'm not leaving you behind. We're in this together, remember?" Before Michael could protest, Grace intervened. "I have an idea," she said, pulling out her phone, "but I'll need you to give me some time." Emily nodded. "There are tunnels that go deeper into the mountain. We can use the flashlights on our phones to guide us." As they ventured deeper into the mine, the sound of footsteps and voices behind them indicated that Frank and his men had entered. The darkness seemed to close in around them, oppressive and threatening. Noah, scared but brave, clung to Emily's hand. "I'm scared," he whispered. Emily knelt in front of him. "I'm scared too, honey, but you know what? Sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means facing that fear and moving forward." Michael, observing the scene, felt his heart swell with love and admiration for Emily. Despite everything they had been through, despite the revelations and dangers, she remained a pillar of strength and compassion. As they advanced through the tunnels, Grace worked frantically on her phone. "I almost have it," she murmured. "What are you doing?" Michael asked. "Sending the evidence to the police and the media," Grace replied. "If something happens to us, at least the truth will come to light." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Small stones fell from the tunnel ceiling, and a muffled noise like distant thunder resonated in the darkness. "The mine is collapsing," Emily shouted. "We have to get out of here." But before they could move, a figure emerged from the shadows in front of them. It was Robert Miller, Michael and Alexander's father, his face a mask of pain and determination. "Dad," Michael gasped, incredulous. Robert looked at them, his eyes stopping on each of them before settling on Grace. "I'm sorry," he said in a hoarse voice. "I'm so sorry." Before anyone could react, Robert pressed a detonator he was holding in his hand. The deafening noise of an explosion filled the tunnel, and everything plunged into darkness. When Michael regained consciousness, he found himself surrounded by debris. Dust floated in the air, illuminated by the beams of light from the flashlights scattered on the ground. Coughing, he slowly sat up, desperately searching for the others. "Emily! Noah! Mom!" he shouted, his voice hoarse from the dust. A nearby groan made him turn. Emily was emerging from among the debris, protectively holding Noah against her chest. The boy seemed unharmed, although he was trembling with fear. "We're okay," Emily said, her voice laden with relief upon seeing Michael. "Where's Grace?" A movement to their right revealed Grace, who was getting up with difficulty, helped by Robert. "What's going on?" Michael demanded, confusion and anger mixing in his voice. "Why did you do this, Dad?" Robert, his face streaked with tears, began to explain. "Frank was holding me hostage. He forced me to place the explosives, threatening to kill you all if I didn't. But I managed to modify the charge so that it only blocked the tunnel, keeping us safe inside and Frank outside." Grace approached her husband, taking his hand. "Robert has been working in secret all these years to gather evidence against Frank and his accomplices, Alexander's. Accident, it was an attempt to silence him when he was close to discovering the truth." Emily, still holding Noah, looked at the elder Millers with a mixture of amazement and caution. "So all this faking your death, separating from your children, was part of a plan to protect them and expose Frank?" Robert nodded gravely. "I know we caused unimaginable pain to all of you, especially to you, Michael, and to Alexander, but we had to keep you safe while we unraveled this web of corruption." Michael, struggling with a storm of emotions, took a step towards his parents. "All these years, the pain, the guilt, how could you?" Grace, with tears in her eyes, extended a hand towards her son. "We did it out of love, Michael. A love that sometimes blinds us and makes us make terrible decisions in the name of protection. An emotionally charged silence filled the tunnel. Each of those present was dealing with their own feelings, with the revelations that threatened to change everything they thought they knew. It was Noah who broke the silence. "Does that mean I have grandparents?" he asked innocently, looking at Robert and Grace with curiosity. The question, so simple and pure, seemed to break the tension. A soft laugh mixed with tears burst from Grace. "Yes, little one, you have grandparents who love you more than you can." Imagine. Emily, observing the scene, felt her heart divide between the love she felt for this makeshift family and the pain for the lies and secrets that had brought them to this point. Michael, noticing her expression, approached her. "Emily," he began, his voice soft but firm, "I know all this is crazy. I know you have every reason in the world to walk away from us, from me. But I want you to know that my feelings for you are real, despite everything, despite the secrets and lies. What I feel for you and for Noah is the truest thing I've ever experienced in my life." Emily looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Michael, But before she could continue, a noise. Claude's response was limited as it hit the maximum length, allowed at this time GL continua. But before she could continue, a noise from the other side of the debris alerted them. Frank's voice, muffled, but still audible, reached them. "I know you're in there, this isn't over." Robert straightened up, his face showing fierce determination. "He's right, this isn't over, but it's going to end today." Pulling a device from his pocket, Robert activated it. A red light began to blink. "This will transmit our location to the police. Frank has no escape." As the sound of sirens began to be heard in the distance, mixing with Frank's frustrated shouts, the Miller family, along with Emily, looked at each other. They had gone through betrayals, lies, losses, and reunions, but now, united in this dark tunnel, they faced together what was to come. Emily, looking at Michael and then at Noah, made a decision. "I don't know what the future holds for us," she said, "but I know I want to face it with you, all of you." Michael hugged her, and Noah joined the hug. Robert and Grace, observing the scene, approached timidly until they were all united in a group hug. As the police approached and Frank's fate was sealed, a new family was born from the ashes of the past. A family united not by blood, but by love, loyalty, and the ability to forgive. The dark tunnel surrounding them no longer seemed threatening, but a symbol of the path they had traveled. And although the future was uncertain, they knew they would face it together, stronger, for the trials they had overcome. As they waited for rescue, each immersed in their thoughts but united by an unbreakable bond, a certainty settled in their hearts. True love, the kind of love that overcomes betrayals, lies, and years of separation, was the most powerful force of all. And that love, forged in adversity and tested in the fire of truth, would be the foundation upon which they would build their future. Dawn broke over the city, its first golden rays illuminating the entrance to the mine where, hours earlier, a drama had unfolded that would forever change the lives of the Miller family and Emily. The place bustled with activity. Police, paramedics, and rescue teams worked tirelessly to secure the area and attend to those. Involved Emily, Michael, Noah, Grace, and Robert slowly emerged from the darkness of the tunnel, blinking in the sudden daylight. They were covered in dust, physically and emotionally exhausted, but alive and united. A few meters from them, Frank Saunders was being handcuffed and led to a police car, his face a mask of fury and defeat. As the paramedics attended to them, Emily observed the scene with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The last 24 hours had been like an emotional roller coaster, revealing truths that had shaken the foundations of her world. Now, with the adrenaline subsiding, she faced the reality of what all this meant for her future. Michael, noticing her pensive expression, approached her. "Emily," he began, his voice soft but firm, "I know all this is overwhelming. I would understand if you wanted to distance yourself from all this, from us." Emily looked at him, her eyes reflecting a storm of emotions. Michael, I'm not going to lie to you. Part of me is terrified. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about Alexander, about you has changed." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But another part of me, the part that has fallen in love with you and Noah over these months, knows that what we have is real and worth fighting for." Michael felt his heart race at these words. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Emily interrupted with a small smile, "that it won't be easy, but I want to try. I want to be part of this family, as complicated and unconventional as it may be." Before Michael could respond, Noah came running up, closely followed by Grace and Robert. "Dad, Emily, can we go home now?" the boy asked, oblivious to the intimate moment he had just interrupted. Emily knelt to be at Noah's eye level. "Yes, honey, we're going home, all of us." Robert, who had been observing the interaction in silence, stepped forward. "Emily," he said, his voice laden with emotion, "I know we have no right to ask you anything after everything that's happened, but if you'll allow us, Grace and I would like to be part of your lives. Noah's life, Michael's, and yours." Emily looked at the older man, seeing in his eyes the weight of years of secrets and difficult decisions. Then she looked at Grace, who was anxiously awaiting her response. Finally, her eyes fell on Michael and Noah, who were watching her with hope and love. With a smile that lit up her tired face, Emily nodded. "I think it's time for this family to be complete." As they prepared to leave the site, a police officer approached them. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Michael," he said, "we'll need you to come to the station to give your formal statements and—" He paused, looking at Robert and Grace. "We'll need to discuss the legal situation of Mr. and Mrs. Miller." Michael felt the tension returning to his body, but Emily took his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We'll face it together," she said quietly. The following weeks were a whirlwind of statements, meetings with lawyers, and difficult decisions. The reappearance of Robert and Grace Miller caused a sensation in the media, and the truth about the conspiracy that had led to Alexander's death finally came to light. Frank Saunders and his accomplices were prosecuted, facing long prison sentences. The Miller Company, shaken by the scandals, had to undergo a deep restructuring. Robert and Grace, although avoiding criminal charges thanks to their cooperation with the authorities, had to face the legal and social consequences of their faked disappearance. It was a painful process, but necessary to clear the family name and start anew. Through all of this, Emily remained firm in her decision to stay with Michael and Noah. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, heated arguments, and sleepless nights, but with each obstacle overcome, their bond grew stronger. 6 months after that night in the mine, the Miller family gathered at the mansion for a special dinner. The house, once cold and full of secrets, now overflowed with life and laughter. Emily, radiant in a blue dress, observed the scene with her heart full of joy. Noah played animatedly with Robert, who seemed to have discovered a second youth in his role as grandfather. Grace and Martha chatted in the kitchen, preparing the final details of dinner. Michael approached Emily, putting an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, softly. Emily smiled, resting her head on Michael's shoulder. "About how much everything has changed, about how lucky we are." Michael nodded, kissing her forehead. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice trembling slightly with nerves. Emily turned to look at him, intrigued. "What is it?" With a fluid movement, Michael knelt in front of her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. The collective gasp of those present filled the room. "Emily," Michael began, his voice laden with emotion, "these last few months have been the most difficult and yet the most beautiful of my life. You've been my rock, my confidant, my partner. You've accepted my past, you've embraced my present, and I want you to be my future. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of marrying me?" Tears ran freely down Emily's cheeks as she looked at the beautiful ring in the box, and then at Michael. Her answer was instant and without doubt. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The room erupted in applause and cheers as Michael slid the ring onto Emily's finger, and they melted into a passionate kiss. Noah ran towards them, joining the hug. "Does this mean Emily will officially be my mom?" the boy asked, his eyes bright with excitement. Emily knelt to be at his level. "Honey, in my heart, you're already my son. This just makes it official for the rest of the world." The dinner that followed was a celebration of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Robert offered an emotional toast, thanking everyone for the second chance and promising to dedicate the rest of his life to being the father and grandfather his family deserved. As the night progressed and the moon rose over the Miller mansion, Emily found herself alone for a moment on the balcony. Looking at the stars, she thought of Alexander and the unexpected turns her life had taken. Michael found her there, enveloping her in an embrace from behind. "Everything okay?" "He?" asked softly. Emily turned in his arms, looking at him with love. "More than okay," she replied. "I was thinking about how strange fate is, how sometimes pain and loss can lead us to the greatest happiness." Michael nodded, understanding. "Alexander would be happy for us, I know." "Yes," Emily agreed, "and I'm sure that somehow he had something to do with us finding each other." As they shared a kiss under the stars, both felt a deep sense of peace and certainty. The path that had led them there had been full of obstacles, secrets, and pain, but each trial had strengthened them. Each revelation had united them more. In the living room, Noah played with his grandparents, his laughter resonating throughout the house. Grace and Robert, redeemed by the love of their family, enjoyed the second chance life had given them. And on the balcony, Emily and Michael embraced, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives. The Miller mansion, once witness to tragedies and secrets, was now home to a family that had learned that true love can overcome any obstacle. A family that had been reborn from the ashes of the past, stronger and more united than ever. As the night advanced and the party continued inside, Emily and Michael remained on the balcony, enjoying the tranquility and the promise of a future together. The ring on Emily's finger sparkled under the moonlight, a symbol of their love and the new life they were about to begin. And so, with the sound of laughter and music floating in the air, the story of the Millers entered a new chapter. A chapter full of hope, love, and the promise of a bright future. Because in the end they had discovered that true love, the kind of love that overcomes betrayals, lies, and years of separation, was the most powerful force of all, and that love, forged in adversity and tested in the fire of truth, would be the foundation upon which they would build their future, together, as the family they were always meant to be.